Good morning. It's 11:11 on Wednesday. It's February 9th. It's also the 8th of Adar. I love that. It's the 8th of Adar in the year 5782. We are in the Hebrew 80s right now, and it is quite a time to be alive. So I'm very excited to bring you guys. Man, God just pulled this all together this morning because I was thinking of something which we started with, but then he said, and then we're going to talk about this. So I'm very excited today to bring you guys the power of alignment, the rhythm of the seasons, and beating resistance. So all of this goes together so awesome, and I can't wait to dig in. So we are in the season of winter, and the winter season obviously started last year, right? Started in December of last year, but we are in the winter season. And so we're like right in the middle of it. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the seasons and about that, which will be awesome. If you have been a part of our coaching group, you got one of these, the Living an Inspired Life. So happy with this. And if you aren't, you can get it on, you can order it on Amazon. Yes, you can. So I'm going to be reading a little bit out of this. I'm going to be reading out of a few things, and I'll be sharing all that with you. But we're going to start today with this idea of the four seasons. And this is so powerful of alignment. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. So daily life in ancient Israel and really everywhere else is largely influenced by things beyond human control, right? Like weather, the seasons, right? All of these things are beyond our control, right? So God created the seasons to teach us that one, he controls the timing of events, and two, his promises are always true. How cool is that? So he divided the year into four seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. And the function of these natural weather cycles illustrate the process of aligning our minds, our hearts, and our actions to him and with his design. What is his design? And when we do that, when we align with that, we align with his promised blessings. So in Genesis 8:22, this is out of the Complete Jewish Bible. It says, "So long as the earth exists, sowing time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night will not cease." So he talks about that, setting this up for us in Genesis. So a natural season represents one of the four divisions of the calendar year, and it's determined by the Earth's yearly revolution around the sun. So a spiritual season depends on the extent to which our lives revolve around the sun, S-O-N, revolve around Jesus. So cool. So we're looking at the physical as well as the spiritual. So in Ecclesiastes 3:1, it says, "For everything there is a season, a right time for every intention under heaven." So powerful. I love it. So, although the scriptures specifically mention winter, spring, summer, and autumn or fall, you might be surprised that the four seasons are actually only two of them are actually mentioned by name. So, in the autumn, which is in Hebrew is stav, it's mentioned in Song of Solomon 2:11, and it says, and it's as a reference of the time of winter rains. That's where it's mentioned. And then spring. So only winter and spring are actually mentioned by name. And the Hebrew of spring is aviv, and it's mentioned twice. And both instances devote a stage of the ripening of barley. That's what they're talking about, is when the barley ripens. So it ripens during the season of Aviv. And this occurs during the Hebrew month of Nisan, which is the first month of spring. So the scriptures only recognize these two by name, or as the writers of the Talmud put it, the days of sun and the days of rain. So the four seasons have a very spiritual purpose. Have any of you ever heard of C.S. Lewis? and I'm sure that you have. He is one of the most prolific and amazing Christian writers of all time. He has written, I don't even remember what years he was born, that he lived, I mean, but his works are epic. Mere Christianity, epic, so good. And one of the first books that I read of his was the Screwtape Letters. And I read this as a pretty young Christian with no idea of a spiritual battle at all. And to be quite honest, at the time that I was reading it, I was in a very intense spiritual battle. Um, and this opened my eyes to what I was dealing with, in a sense. So the book is amazing, the Screwtape Letters, and it's where he is imagining it's a correspondence between a chief demonic tempter named Screwtape and his apprentice Wormwood. And the book is him writing letters to counsel and train Wormwood into being a demon and reaching the levels that he is, because Screwtape is at the height of that. At one point, he comments on the horror of the same old thing. And this is where I'm going to connect this to the seasons. This is so amazing. So these are, I'm going to read right out of the book right here. So according to the demon, the familiarity of contempt is this: one of the most valuable passions we have produced in the human heart, an endless source of heresies in religion, folly in counsel, infidelity in marriage, and inconsistency in friendship. Sorry. So they're saying that what they've done is they've taken this valuable passion and they've twisted it, right? Because Satan doesn't have the power to create anything. All he can do is twist and create a shadow of what God intended. So what he's saying to his nephew Wormwood is, and it's an endless source of heresies in religion, a folly in counsel, infidelity in marriage, and inconsistency in friendship. So if you think about those things, that you go, wow, these are some of our deepest woundings come from betrayal, right? And these are things that he's talking about. Betrayal doesn't come from an enemy. It comes from someone that you trust, someone that you have allowed in. And so he's talking about these areas of religion where you feel that you should be trusting, right? You're learning about God and Jesus and everything. In counsel, getting counsel, bad counsel, in marriage and in friendship. And he's talking about, this is what we've produced. We've been able to really hurt people by producing this in these areas, because these things are painful. We get betrayed by people that we know, that we love, that we trust at some point, right? So he goes on to further explain this. This is a long one, so I'm going to read this and hopefully you can follow, because you'll also find that C.S. Lewis writes in a way that you almost, it's not quite Shakespeare hard, but he has such a level of his vocabulary and intellect. So anyway, he goes on to say this: the humans live in time and experience reality successively. To experience much of it, therefore, they must experience many different things. In other words, they must experience change. And since they need change, the enemy, which is what Screwtape calls God, has made change pleasurable to them, just as he made eating pleasurable. But since he does not wish them to make change an end in itself, he has balanced the love of change in them by a love of permanence. He has contrived to gratify both tastes together in the very world he has made, by that union of change and permanence which we call rhythm. And as I was reading this, I'm reminded that just like all the things he's talking about, think about all of the ways that anxiety and stress and even mental and emotional illnesses and things are results of this area. God has promised us a balance in this. And Screwtape is saying we need to make people not feel this balance. We need to get them off of that balance, so that they're afraid of change, so that change creates in them all kinds of phobias and all of these things. How powerful is that? God designed us to have this permanence to ground us as we experience the change that comes from a natural progression of growth physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything, right? It's so interesting because what we teach in grief recovery is that unresolved grief is conflicting feelings caused by the end of a familiar pattern of behavior. And so when you're processing through the traumas in your life, what the result is a balance so that you have the tools to process through grief. And grief are those endings. And we talked about this a lot in the last video last week about celebrating endings to fully embrace beginnings. So good. So this just confirms that he's saying that he has balanced a love of change in them by a love of permanence. And God designed that to keep us balanced and secure in him. And so what has happened is they've done everything in their power to pervert that. So amazing to see this. It's rhythm. He says it's rhythm. So consequently, God gives them the seasons, each season different, yet every year the same, so that spring is always felt as a novelty, yet always as the recurrence of an immemorial theme. So immemorial being that it's always going to be that way, right? It's new, but it's also, we know what happens every year with spring, with fall. So I love how this is showing what God has designed the seasons to be. Is there's a permanence in them. There's a change, but yet there's a familiarity. And so that is really the essence of a rhythm, and being able to embrace those rhythms of change. And when you're aligned with those and you're aware of what winter is, what spring is, you are able to be aligned on a whole different level. And trust me, the more that you read and understand the Hebrew mindset, you're going to go back and read the Bible and you're going to see things you never saw before, because you realize that who the Bible is written to is a Hebrew audience, right? All of it is. So this is amazing. And Lewis got it exactly right. We're glad it's spring, but we're also glad that it's not always spring, right? Spring is the time for what to plant, right? To plant in new seed. So each season illustrates the beauty of the great designer. And you can't be planting all the time. You've got to have a season where it's growing and you're nurturing it. And then you have a season where you're going to have a harvest, right? So all of these things. So the Jews, influenced by a Greco-Roman civilization, later divided the year into 4 seasons, and they named each one according to the original Hebrew name of the month in which the season began. So the seasons are called winter, spring, summer, and fall by the first month in that season. So good. So ask any farmer and they will tell you that winter is not the season for planting. We're in winter right now. It's not the season for planting. If you planted right now, probably it would not grow because it's too cold and it's too rainy. It's just going to, the seeds are going to float away, right? So ask any farmer. It is not the season for planting, but what is it the season for? This is the season for planning. That's what winter is about. It is a time to plan out what to plant during the next season. So this is a time for planning. And our spiritual winter can be a time of darkness, right? You look around and visibly you see the trees don't have leaves on it. It looks kind of stark. It's beautiful in its own way, right? Even in Texas, I notice, this isn't so much in California where I grew up, but in Texas, because it's not that cold there, all the lawns are kind of yellow. But there's a beauty in that. You see, it's like, I love those pictures of the stark trees and the yellow grass. There's a beauty in this. So the trees are barren and the flowers have withered and died. And although we may feel like God has deserted us sometimes, he desires this time to be a season of curling up in his lap for warmth and intimacy. So the practice of praise and gratitude is what helps us be connected and stay and feel connected to God. So as winter sets in, the farmers are busy taking care of their equipment, taking care of their animals. So it's the season when he gives us direction for planting new crops in the spring, which is coming. It's a time to live off what was stored from previous harvests. It's a time to shovel snow and ice from the driveway of your mind. A time to learn to navigate icy roads as you live out your life. Use the tools that you have pulled in all year. Use those tools. It's a time to there's a lot of pain and sadness and heartache and trauma happening all around us. And it's a time to navigate these things using the tools, using the connections that you've made. It's a time for evaluation, planning, and preparation. So that's what this time is. Our spiritual winter can also be like the Sabbath, where during this time we might feel like God isn't hearing us or speaking to us. You might not. I'm feeling like the floodgates have opened up these last couple of weeks. It's been amazing. But it also feels a little bit like a wilderness experience. And what is that wilderness experience? It's where God took the Israelites out of Egypt, and the whole wilderness was about him showing them who he is. So that is what this time is about. Sometimes we might respond to these things by working harder, by keeping busy, but God's desire is simply for us to remain in him and reflect on his faithfulness. This is a time to curl up, get a fire in your fireplace, blankets and cozy. That's what this time reminds me of. So we may feel like whatever God has placed in our lives is unfruitful and assume it's dying, but don't be deceived. Winter is not a time for fruit bearing. It's God designed this season as a time to plan for seasons ahead. So this is so awesome. And when I was thinking about that, about God preparing us for seasons ahead, what brought into my mind is this idea of resistance. This idea of when we step forward, there is resistance. And how many of you have ever heard of this book, The War of Art? Stephen Pressfield. He's amazing. Dan has read most of his books. He writes, I think it's fiction. I'm pretty sure he's a fiction writer. And books that have, one of my favorites that he's written. I've seen the movie and I love the movie. It's Bagger Vance. Bagger Vance, is that what it's called? Beautiful story that came out years ago, but that's one of his, The Legend of Bagger Vance. That's what it's called. But he wrote this book called The War of Art. And this book you can really read through very quickly. It is, it's kind of written in a way like Screw Tape Letters, kind of in a way where each chapter is almost like he's writing on a specific topic and it's short, couple pages. So I wanted to share some of what I learned in his book of resistance. He's talking about living the unlived life. This is an amazing book. It's an incredible book. It says resistance is the most toxic force on the planet. It is the root of more unhappiness than poverty, disease, and okay, he has a very funny sense of humor. So I'm going to share this here because I know you guys will crack up at this, but oh my gosh. Okay, so this is his sense of humor. Resistance is the most toxic force on the planet. It is the root of more unhappiness than poverty, disease, and erectile dysfunction. It's more unhappiness than that. Okay, so to yield to resistance deforms our spirits. It stunts us and makes us less than we are and were born to be. And if you believe in God, you must declare resistance evil, for it prevents us from achieving the life God intended when he endowed each of us with our own unique genius. I love that. And genius is a Latin word, and Romans used it to denote an inner spirit, holy, which watches over us, guiding us to our calling. So a writer writes with his genius, an artist paints with their genius. Everyone who creates operates from this sacramental center. It is our soul's seat, the vessel that holds our being in potential, our star's beacon and Polaris. Yes, so good. Every sun casts a shadow, and genius's shadow is resistance. As powerful as is our soul's call to realization, so potent are the forces of resistance arrayed against it. So, so good. How many of us, think about this, this is so powerful. How many of us have become drunks, drug addicts, developed tumors and neuroses, succumb to painkillers, gossip, and compulsive cell phone use simply because we don't do that thing that our heart, our inner genius is calling us to? Resistance defeats us. So powerful. Okay, so who am I and why am I here? These are not easy questions to answer, right? They're not easy because the human being isn't wired to function as an individual. I loved his take on this. This is so amazing. We talk about how we are born for connection, for community. Even God is one of three, the Trinity, right? So I love where he's going with this because he's saying we're not wired to function as an individual. We're wired tribally to act as part of a group. Our psyches are programmed by millions of years of hunter-gatherer evolution. We know what the clan is. We know how to fit into the band and the tribe. We don't know how to be alone. We don't know how to be free individuals. And so there's a balance. Once again, we go back to that idea of balance, that we want to belong. We're made for connection, but yet we have to be able to stand as an individual, and to connect to what is our own freedom, right? My book that I'm going to be finishing this year, Blessed Pilgrimage, that is the idea behind it, is getting out of bondage. And then how do you live in freedom? How do you live in that? So and he asked this question, may it be that the human race is not ready for freedom? Think about that. Are you ready for freedom? Are you ready for that? So it says here, the truly free individual is free only to the extent of his own self-mastery, while those who will not govern themselves are condemned to find masters to govern over them. So we're going to dig into this. What is self-mastery to you? What does that look like? We're going to talk about that. And how powerful is this that says those who will not govern themselves are condemned to find masters to govern over them. There's a very powerful quote that I love by Pietro Oratino. Then it says, I am indeed a king, for I know how to rule myself. It's funny because when I was young and thought life was about freedom and I could drink how much I want, eat how much I want, it was a really long, hard, painful road to discover that the things that I thought were freedom were actually bondage. That's a very long, hard road, right? And for some of you, that might even be a light bulb moment where you're going, yeah. I was talking to somebody recently who has been sober for an amount of time, a little over a year, and he was going through something. And he said, his friend said, you know what, when you're on the other side of this, we're going to celebrate and you're going to just get drunk one more time. And he was sharing that with me. And I was like, gosh, I just don't see that as a celebration. That is not a celebration. And it was an interesting conversation because he was kind of like, huh, you know, there is a process of unlearning what the world and what we've learned is freedom, and to see that it's actually bondage. So resistance and fear. I wanted to share this. So powerful. Are you paralyzed with fear? Well, that is a good sign that there's fear. Fear is good. It's an indicator, right? It tells us what we have to do. If you lean in and you bring that fear before God and you lean into it and you listen, God is going to speak to you there. He loves to meet you there. He loves to meet you where you have fear, because he's going to remind you that his perfect love casts it all out. Casts it all out. So the more scared we are of a work or a calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. Resistance is experienced as fear. The degree of fear equates the strength of resistance. Therefore, the more fear we feel about a specific enterprise, the more certain we can be that that enterprise is important to us, and it's the growth of our soul. It's about that. That is why we feel so much resistance, because if it meant nothing to us or for us, there would be no resistance. What would they be? What would they have to stop you doing? I wanted to read this part that I love. And when I read books, I write all over them. I mark them all up. I love that. And this page is called Resistance and Healing. And if you think about it, when is resistance going to really come? Is when you're healing and when you're in a process of that, when you're in a process of moving forward. When you're not, resistance can, take a break. You're already doing it to yourself, right? You're doing this to yourself. So there's a strong resistance that comes when we begin a process of healing. Have you ever spent time? Wait. Oh, I lost my place. Okay. There's a subculture of healing in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's an idea that there's something therapeutic in the atmosphere. It's a safe place to go and get yourself together. And there are other places also that are kind of known for that. Ojai, Santa Barbara, different places, right? The concept is that these environments seem to be the one that one needs to complete his healing before he is ready to do his work. This way of thinking in and of itself is a form of resistance. It's a form of resistance because guess what? Your healing is part of your work. It's part of the process. So remember, the part of us that we imagine needs healing is not the part we create from. That part is far deeper and stronger. The part we create from cannot be touched by anything that happened to us, that society did, that we experienced, trauma, loss, abuse, addictions, even things we did to ourselves. That part is unsullied, uncorrupted, soundproof, waterproof, and bulletproof. In fact, the more troubles we've got, the better and richer that part becomes. So think about what we were talking about earlier, that it was saying that our the gifts that God have given us, our genius, that is the spirit that's inside of us. That is where our creation comes from. Our creativity comes from. That part can't be touched by these things. But what happens is we go through these things and we put these layers on top that we have to sift through to get connected to that again, to believe again, to trust again. So, but that part is in you and it is bulletproof. And it only gets stronger from the things that you have experienced and gone through. So the part that needs healing is our personal life. But personal life doesn't have to do with stopping the work, right? What better way of healing than to find our center of self-sovereignty? What an amazing word that is, self-sovereignty. I love that word. Let's see. There was one, I think I lost okay, so I just wanted to read this. This part and remember the word self-sovereignty because we're going to come back to that. So this last part of the book is called Combating Resistance and what he calls turning pro. And I love that. So it says here, this is a quote from a mercenary of the 5th century. And it says, "It is one thing to study war, but it's another thing to live the warrior's life." So resistance hates it when we turn pro. Hates it when we turn pro. Okay. And here it is. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit about this on fear, and then we're going to talk about self-sovereignty. We're going to end with self-sovereignty. I love it. Okay, so resistance feeds on fear. And what is the fear about? We're going to unpack that a little bit. Fear of the consequences of following our heart, fear of bankruptcy, fear of poverty, fear of insolvency, fear of groveling when we try to make it on our own, and of groveling when we give up and come crawling back to where we started. Fear of being selfish, of being rotten wives or disloyal husbands, fear of failing to support our families, of sacrificing their dreams for ours, fear of betraying our race, our hood, our homies, fear of failure, fear of being ridiculous, fear of throwing away the education, the training, the preparation to those that have loved us and who have sacrificed for us and that we've worked our butts off for. Fear of launching into the void, of hurtling out too far, fear of passing some point of no return beyond which we can't recant, we can't reverse, we can't rescind, but we must live with this choice for the rest of our lives. Fear of madness, fear of insanity, and ultimately fear of death. And on a side note, right now, in a spiritual sense, for the last couple years, there is a collective spirit of death over our families, our homes, our states, our country, our world. It is a fear of death. It is a spirit of death, of our dreams, of our hopes, of our bodies, of our physical health, everything. And these are all serious fears, but they're not the real fear. Not the master fear, the mother of all fears that is so close to us that even when we verbalize it, we don't believe it. And what he is saying here is it is the fear that we will succeed. And it's so interesting. And I've read this and I've worked through this, like, what is this fear of success? What is that? But there is a strong fear in this, in being something that others might reject us for, or that we might lose people over. We don't want to think of ourselves more highly than we ought, right? So this fear that we will succeed, that we can access the powers we secretly know we possess, that we can become the person we sense in our hearts that we truly are. This is the most terrifying prospect a human being can face because it ejects him at one go from all the tribal inclusions his psyche is wired for and has been for 50 million years. So this is what we're talking about, is that deep-rooted, that we know how to be connected. And when we actually think about ourselves and work on ourselves and step forward, I love how he says this. It's going to eject us from the tribal inclusions that our psyche is wired for. Excuse me, tribal inclusions, family things that have been passed down from generation to generation, belief systems, negative belief systems that keep us from stepping forward. Who are we to not be powerful, to not rise up? We fear discovering that we are more than we think we are, more than even our parents or our teachers thought we were. We fear that we actually possess the talent that our still small voice tells us, that we actually have the guts, the perseverance, the capacity. We fear that we truly can steer our ship, plant our flag, reach our promised land. We fear this because if it's true, then we might become estranged from all we know. Pass through a membrane, we become monsters and monstrous in our minds, right? We know that if we embrace our ideals, we must prove worthy of them. And that scares the living heck out of us. That scares us. What will become of us? Will we lose friends? Will we lose family who won't recognize us? Will we wind up alone in the cold with nothing and no one to hold on to? Of course, this is exactly what happens, but here's the trick. We wind up in space, but not alone. Instead, we are tapped into an unquenchable, undepletable, inexhaustible source of wisdom, consciousness, and companionship. Yeah, we lose friends, but we find friends too, in places we never thought to look. And they're better friends, truer friends, and we're better and truer to them. Do you believe me? That's what this is about. It's so powerful to think that we have a this idea, this connection, and we're made for connection, yet we have to find the balance of discovering who we are, of stepping into our freedom and our calling. Because it has to happen, it has to happen at the same time, right? We have to believe that. We have to step boldly into that. And that will mean stepping out of what you know. And man, there's many things that are coming to my mind that stop us from that, that create this tribal idea that you're not really supposed to rise up beyond that, that, you know, getting out of the hood in our minds, right? I come from a line on both sides of alcoholism and addiction. There's also a long line of incredible talent, artistic talent, incredible talent on both sides of my family lines. So we also get to experience the good of our ancestors, right? But we want to heal from and stop the bad, stop the things that stop us, and that really thwart what we're meant to do and be. So there's incredible, I think, insight to come from that fear of success and understanding what's underneath that. And so really think about that today. Meditate on that. Ask God, what are you calling me into? And you will lose friends. You will lose friends when you step out. I have shared before that even back in the day when I got sober, when I was 26, I got sober. And it was a strange time for me because all of my friends partied. And it was a stepping out of a very familiar group, my people, right? They were partiers. And I stayed in that group for a long time and just didn't party. But after a while, you realize that you want to be surrounded by people that are moving in a direction and not just staying, right? And I'm still friends with a lot of people. And a lot of those people, obviously, we were young, right? We all grew in different time in different ways. But there is a process to this. And I loved how this really illustrated the depth of that. You know, because you could say, like we say, that your results are the clearest indication of your intentions. Harsh reality, but true. So you could say, I don't understand that. Like if someone told me you have a fear of success, I'd be like, really? I don't think I have a fear of success. But my results were showing that I had a very self-sabotaging, I don't want to say character, but my choices were very self-sabotaging, where I would move forward, but I would always make sure that I didn't get beyond a certain place that I was comfortable with. And this is deep stuff. This is stuff that are things we're talking about where, you know, 95% of what drives you is your subconscious. So it's the things that are planted deep down in there. So it's a journey to discover that. And that's what we are all about. We are all about that in self-care, soul care. So I wanted to close out with this this idea, coming back to this word, self-sovereignty. And I love this word so much. And we are moving into, when we move into the spring, one of the things that we do in the spring is count the Omer. And if you've been with us, you know that is the idea. Think about this. When God took his people out of Egypt, he took them through the Red Sea and they went through the desert, right? And he was preparing them to receive him, to receive his word, and to receive his promised land. But they had to go through this process to be able to accept freedom, to be able to step into it. And counting the Omer is the 7 weeks that go from Passover, which is kind of cool because this year on the calendar, it's aligned. So Passover is actually Good Friday on the calendar this year, which is kind of cool. So Passover begins the next day. We count the Omer 50 days up until Pentecost. Shavuot is the Hebrew word where God gave his Torah through Moses when Moses gave the 10 Commandments. So what he's doing to prepare them is what we do counting the Omer. And so each emotion is really looked at. It's like unpacked. It's unpacked. Those emotions are love, discipline, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding, and sovereignty. It all the top of it is sovereignty. Okay, so healthy functional emotions are multidimensional and includes within itself a blend of all 7 of these attributes. These are all attributes of God and us because we're made in his image. So it's a very powerful study that we will be doing in the spring. But I just wanted to talk a minute about sovereignty. It's the final one. So it is the last of the 7 attributes, and it is different. Oh my gosh, these my glasses are flimsy. They're very different. They're very comfortable, but they're really weird. Okay, so sovereignty is the last of these 7 attributes, and it's different than the previous 6 because it is a state of being rather than an activity. How incredible is this? We've been talking about that, right? Our state of being. Who are we being? And in our coaching, we finished with our I am statements. This is who we are claiming. We are speaking these things. So that's what this is. It is a state of being. It is the spirit of leadership and a passive expression of human dignity that possesses nothing of its own except what it receives from the other 6 emotions. On the other hand, sovereignty manifests the character and majesty of the human spirit created in the image of God. It is the very essence of what makes us human. So think about that. Our state of being, then, it's attributed to how are these things in our life? Love, discipline, compassion, endurance, humility, and bonding. And all of these things are processes in our health, in our recovery, and in our journey, because ultimately we are recovering from being fractured, right? From a lack of bonding, from an inability to bond. So powerful to think of all of these things together. Okay, so when love, discipline, compassion, endurance, and humility are properly channeled into the psyche through bonding, the result is malchut, which is sovereignty. Ultimately, bonding is what nurtures us and allows our sovereignty to surface and flourish. It is also a sense of belonging, of knowing that you matter and that you make a difference, that you possess the ability to be a capable leader in your own right. It gives you independence and confidence, a feeling of certainty and authority. So it's so amazing because where it begins is a sense of belonging in yourself, to yourself, right? That power of that. When a mother cradles her child and the child sees affection in the mother's eyes, the child receives the message, I am wanted and needed in this world. I have a comfortable place where I will always be loved. I have nothing to fear. I feel like royalty in my heart. That is the power of true connection, right? Of true bonding. So there's a lot of this is right out of our book, Living an Inspired Life. And we're going to be using this when we're counting the Omer later in the spring. So this is this prayer is traditionally prayed after the Omer has been counted. So it's every day in this process of connecting to God and connecting to these amazing attributes that we have that God wants to hone in us. So it's so this is in Psalm 67, and it says, God, be gracious to us and bless us. May he make his face shine toward us, so that your way may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. Let the peoples give thanks to you. God, let the peoples give thanks to you, all of them. Let the nations be glad and shout for joy, for you will judge the peoples fairly and guide the nations on the earth. Let the peoples give thanks to you, God. Let all of them give thanks to you. The earth has yielded its harvest. May God, our God, bless us. May God continue to bless us so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. So amazing. So that is the self-sovereignty is that connection to that attribute of God that is, you are a king because you know how to rule yourself. And that's where the true freedom is, the freedom to connect to your inner, your genius, your spirit that is in you, that Holy Spirit that is guiding you. So all of that connects, and it starts with us aligning with the rhythm of the seasons. And it's why there's so much resistance, because honestly, Satan knows that if we align and we understand this, we're unstoppable. And all the things that God put on us to do, we will do and achieve. And what will be here is love without judgment, without condemnation, without all of those things. So we so love you guys being a part of our tribe of self-care, soul care. And our number one goal is to provide for you a safe place for you to bridge the gap between your inspiration and your destiny. So we love that. We love you guys so much. Have a beautiful and blessed week. And we will see you again next week for more teaching on the deeper Hebrew roots of our faith. Love you guys. Shalom.